Hi, my name is Angela, and in this video I'm going to be talking about my NAPLEX experience. I passed my NAPLEX just last week, and I'm going to be talking about that experience, what I did to prepare, the testing experience, and just a couple other notes. I'm going to be talking about residency on this channel. I'm just doing weekly videos to hopefully help anyone who's looking to get a perspective of someone who's going through it and offer some advice and tips. I am in the middle of my PGY1 residency that I just started, and I already took the law exam, which I did in a past video, the NPJE that's required for pharmacists in order for them to practice, and now I just took the clinical exam, which is the NAPLEX. It stands for the North American Pharmacist Licensure Examination. And the goal of that is it says on their website, evaluate general practice knowledge, and it's used by boards of pharmacy to assess how competent you are to practice as a pharmacist. So basically it's the clinical side of pharmacy. We have a lot of laws that we have to know and pay attention to and obey, but then there's the other side of just how much clinical knowledge do you know to care for patients in a safe and effective way. So the law exams are specific to each state, and then the NAPLEX will be standardized across the US. So basically I just think I think of it as how smart the US thinks its pharmacists should be in order for them to practice, and it's the minimum competency, basically the baseline that every pharmacist should be at, which I think is really important when you talk about standardizing education and training in order to produce a certain quality of pharmacists inside the US. I already did a video, it was an update video that I talked about some of the costs associated with these exams, how I studied for the NAPLEX. I did an RX prep video, which is it is the tool that I use to study for the NAPLEX, so take a look at that. But I took the NPJE, and then about 2.5 weeks after I did the NAPLEX. So I did a little bit more intense studying during that time period, whereas before it was more of chapter reviews when I had time or when I could make time, and then not really doing things like flashcards or maybe a little bit of exams. But in the 2.5 weeks leading up to the NAPLEX, I definitely did a lot more intense studying like I would for an exam in school. I focused a lot on calculations because math is not my strong suit. It used to be that calculations were about 1/3 of the exam, and I had many pharmacists tell me that just focus on the calculations before you take the exam, but now it's about 18% when you look at the competencies on the NAPP website. But I really suck at math, so I studied a lot right before on the math part, so I could have that ready to go. But in terms of what I had been doing, I was watching, again, RX prep videos, and I was studying the chapters. I stopped doing all of that and just focused on doing the quizzes and then making Quizlets from things that I missed on the quizzes or things that I felt like I wanted to pay attention to. There are some free Quizlets online. I try to look around, but you can make your own, and maybe if you find a Quizlet that's helpful, NAPLEX study Quizlets, you could search for that. But I just found it helpful to make my own and to make very, very brief study guides. RX Prep has a lot of great acronyms for things like steroid conversions, statin equivalencies, and other different enzyme inhibitors and inducers. So I was definitely trying to quiz myself on those. And then once I got into the exam, we have these, dry erase board things. And I would write those down, right as I start the exam so that I could just kind of dump that down and then get on with the exam. On the exam, they give you certain tools to help you out. They give you a calculator, of course. They also give you reference ranges for different lab values, so you'll never really have to memorize the reference ranges for a lab value. And then they have a calculations sheet which has certain equations which probably changes year after year, I'm not sure, but things like corrected calcium, corrected phenytoin, different equations that you don't have to memorize. There will be equations that you have to memorize, and RX Prep does give a list of all the different calculations you should have memorized according to them in order to be ready for the NAPLEX. But that's kind of what we're inside of the exam when you get into it. The test is 225 questions, and I'm not 100% sure the score breakdown. I get confused every time I think about it because right now it's pass-fail. I still think a scaled score to where you have to get a 75 or above, so they only count 150 of your questions. It doesn't really change my approach when I study for this exam. I do my best without, killing myself with studying. I haven't looked up the actual score that I got. There's a way that you can view it. I'll do that later. But yeah, so that's kind of what you're going into. It was a long exam. I was motivated in terms of finishing it because it was a really important exam for me to be able to practice, but I took one 10-minute break. You're allowed to get 2, and it took me about 5 hours, and I think you're allowed 6 total hours. And I was kind of upset because I felt that the questions weren't exactly a minimum competency for a pharmacist, just because I feel like in most practice settings, you're not going to have to be super knowledgeable about certain areas that I felt my test really was heavy on. So my test was very heavy on HIV, HCV, immunizations, and a lot of brand generics. And of course, I only come from one area of the country. Other pharmacists in other areas may be very equipped for that, or maybe, you know, these tests are not the same for each student in one given year. And talking to other students who have recently graduated and their testing experiences, they have different areas that are very heavy with certain questions. And maybe all of those HIV, HCV questions that I got were all my test questions, but definitely walked out of the test feeling like I failed it. So if any of you have taken it or are going to take it, it's okay to think that way, because I definitely failed it when I walked out, but then I passed it. So that's just kind of how emotions go with exams. And honestly, just be careful reading the patient cases that they give you. There's going to be a lot of patient cases, and they're going to ask you a question based off of that, but a lot of the stories for patients were extremely dramatic, and I think it was kind of to pull the students' attention away from the questions. So just watch what you read, because otherwise you might just be thinking about if this is a real case, like what would you do? Just try to keep your head where it should be, which is focusing on the question and answer portion. So getting my answer, same as I spoke about with NPJE, it took me about 5 business days to get the result on NEBP's website. They will not email you. You need to go to their website and refresh and check. Definitely celebrate if you pass. It's worth it. One thing I wanted to talk about, because it happened to me, I do not have a passport. I'm getting one, but I would strongly recommend that anyone who's going to go take these kind of exams, or even just start switching jobs or doing residency, to verify your identity. Most often passports are accepted, and I've never traveled outside of the country, didn't have one, didn't think I needed one, but I got turned away from my NAPLEX because the verification documents that I had weren't enough, even though they were enough when I took my NPJE, but that's a different story. But basically, make sure and validate that the ID you're going to bring is really going to work. Get it in writing. I didn't have it in writing. I spoke to NEBP on the phone, and they were very helpful when I did get turned away, and within the hour that my exam was scheduled, I ended up being able to take it. But point is, if I had to give a word of caution to anyone, either check that your ID will work, get an email or something in writing saying that your ID is valid to take to your Pearson testing center, or just get a passport and have your driver's license. And you won't have to go through the stress of getting rejected and then going back home and then going back to the testing center. And when it comes to that RX prep resource, because I'm not really going to talk about it anymore, I read the whole book, or probably about 80% of it, and I thought it was a very good summary. I'm just someone who I guess wants to have a comprehensive review of something like that before going into residency, but you don't have to study it like you do for like a class, so you're going to be tested very specifically on it. Just give yourself a very general overview, and I may even go back to it as rotations go on, who knows. But they're really good summaries. I thought RX Prep did a really good job. Definitely talk to other students in your class or in your residency who've taken it and get their advice. That's definitely something that helped me out, and I knew that the HIV, HCV questions were coming. Just remember that many people pass, and if you have to take it again, you know, it's not the end of the world. I think you have to wait 45 days if you fail to take it again. And then also there's also requirements, of course, when you start a job, how soon you have to be licensed, but that varies a lot. But just know that it's doable, and hopefully this video talking about my experience and kind of how I felt coming out of it, which was terrible, and how I passed will help you whenever you take it, if you're watching this and you have to take this exam. But hope this video was helpful. If it was, just please like it and then share it with someone else who you think has to take the NAPLEX soon, or you think it could help them. Subscribe to the channel if you want to stay updated on my weekly videos, and then post in anything in the comments that you want me to talk about that you think I could help you with. So have a great week.